Nobody really noticed her. That was just how things were. She sat in the back corner of the music room, always arriving a few minutes early, always leaving right when class ended. While other students chatted and laughed, she kept her eyes on her sheet music, her fingers quietly tapping rhythms on the desk. Her name was Riley Chen, and she was 17 years old. To most people at Lincoln High School, she was just another face in the hallway. The girl who never raised her hand, the one who ate lunch while reading books, the student who seemed perfectly content being invisible. But Riley had a secret, and it was about to change everything. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in late March. Riley was walking past the main bulletin board when her best friend Jessica grabbed her arm. Jessica was everything Riley wasn't: loud, confident, always surrounded by people. They'd been friends since elementary school, back when neither of them cared about being popular or fitting in. "Look at this," Jessica said, pointing at a bright yellow flyer. "The spring talent show. We should totally sign up." Riley felt her stomach drop. You mean you should sign up? You're amazing at singing."
No way.
"I'm not doing it alone." "Come on, Riley. You play piano? You've been playing since you were like 6 years old." "That's different. I play for myself, not for hundreds of people." Jessica crossed her arms. "Exactly. That's the problem. You're incredible, and nobody even knows it. When was the last time you played for anyone besides your mom?" Riley looked away. The truth was, she couldn't remember. She practiced every single day in her bedroom, her keyboard connected to headphones so she wouldn't disturb anyone. Her room was her sanctuary, the one place where she could be completely herself, where her fingers could fly across the keys without anyone watching or judging. "I'll think about it," Riley mumbled, just to end the conversation. But Jessica wasn't the type to let things go. Over the next week, she mentioned the talent show every single day. During lunch, between classes, through text messages at night. She even got their other friend Marcus involved, and soon Riley was facing a full campaign. "Just audition," Marcus said one day. "If you hate it, you can back out. But at least try." Riley wanted to say no. She'd spent years perfecting the art of staying in the background. It was safe there, comfortable. No one expected anything from you when you were invisible. But something inside her had started to shift. Maybe it was because she was a junior now and high school wouldn't last forever. Maybe it was because she'd been working on something special, something she'd never shown anyone. Or maybe she was just tired of being afraid. 3 days before audition, sign-ups closed. Riley found herself standing in front of the music teacher's classroom after school. Mrs. Patterson was organizing sheet music at her desk, humming quietly to herself. She taught at Lincoln High for 20 years and had seen hundreds of students come and go. "Riley," Mrs. Patterson said, looking up with surprise, "what can I do for you?" Riley's mouth felt dry. "I wanted to sign up." "For the talent show auditions." Mrs. Patterson smiled warmly. "That's wonderful. I'm so glad you're participating. What will you be playing?" "Piano, a classical piece. Probably something by Chopin or Mozart." Mrs. Patterson nodded, writing Riley's name on the sign-up sheet. "Perfect. We can always use more classical music. The auditions are next Thursday after school. Just play something you're comfortable with. Nothing too complicated." Riley nodded and left quickly, her heart pounding. As she walked down the empty hallway, she felt a strange mix of excitement and terror. Mrs. Patterson had assumed she'd play something simple and safe, something comfortable. She had no idea what Riley was actually planning that night. Riley sat at her keyboard for 3 hours straight. Her fingers moved across the keys with a confidence that disappeared the moment she stood up. This arrangement, the one she'd been working on for 6 months, was unlike anything she'd ever attempted before. It started with a classical foundation, the kind of piece that would make any music teacher nod with approval. But then it evolved. Jazz improvisation wove through the classical structure. Modern chord progressions emerged. The tempo shifted and changed like a conversation. It was risky. It was bold. It was everything Riley usually wasn't. She'd discovered this style by accident. Late one night, while browsing videos online, She'd watched a pianist blend different genres together, creating something that felt both familiar and completely new. Something clicked in her brain. This was what she wanted to create. Music that told a story. Music that made people feel something. The problem was, she'd never played it for anyone. Not her mom. Not Jessica. Nobody. What if it wasn't actually good? What if she'd spent 6 months on something that was just weird? The audition day arrived faster than Riley expected. She walked into school that Thursday morning with her stomach in knots. All day, she couldn't focus on anything. In math class, she stared at equations without seeing them. In history, the teacher's words became background noise. By the time final period ended, Riley felt like she might throw up. The auditions were being held in the main auditorium. When Riley arrived, about 15 other students were already there. Some practicing their routines, others looking just as nervous as she felt. Jessica spotted her immediately and rushed over. "You came? I wasn't sure you'd actually go through with it." "I'm here," Riley said quietly. "Doesn't mean I won't run away. You won't. I know you won't, 'cause you're brave. Even if you don't think you are." Mrs. Patterson appeared at the front of the auditorium with a clipboard. "All right, everyone. Thank you for coming to auditions. We'll go in sign-up order. This is just to see what you've prepared and make sure everything's appropriate for the show. Remember, you'll have about 5 to 7 minutes for your actual performance." Riley's name was somewhere in the middle of the list. She sat in the audience, watching other students audition. A girl sang a pop song. Twin brothers did a comedy routine. Someone performed a monologue from a play. Everyone seemed so confident, so comfortable being watched. Then Mrs. Patterson called her name. Riley stood up, her legs feeling weak. The walk to the stage felt impossibly long. The piano sat there, waiting. A beautiful, grand piano, so different from her electronic keyboard at home. She'd only played on a real grand piano a handful of times in her life. She sat down on the bench, adjusted it slightly, placed her hands on the keys. The ivory felt smooth and cool under her fingers. Mrs. Patterson smiled encouragingly from the front row. "Whenever you're ready, Riley." Riley took a deep breath. This was it. The moment where she could either play it safe, do exactly what everyone expected, blend into the background one more time, or show them what she'd really been working on. Her fingers hovered over the keys. In that moment, she made a choice. She thought about all those nights alone in her bedroom, creating something beautiful that no one else had heard. She thought about being invisible for so long that people forgot she existed. She was tired of hiding. Riley began to play. With the very first notes, she knew there was no going back. The first notes were soft, gentle, exactly what everyone expected to hear from the quiet girl who sat in the back of music class. Riley's fingers moved across the keys with careful precision, playing a Mozart piece that Mrs. Patterson would recognize immediately. Something safe. Something classical. From her seat in the audience, Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. This was fine. Perfectly acceptable. The girl had good technique, steady rhythm. Nothing spectacular, but solid enough for the talent show. But then something changed. Riley's left hand began to shift. The bass notes started moving in an unexpected direction. The classical melody was still there, still recognizable, but underneath it, something else was building. Something that made Mrs. Patterson sit up straighter in her seat. The tempo picked up slightly. Riley's right hand continued the Mozart theme, but her left hand had gone somewhere completely different. Jazz chords started emerging, rich and complex. Weaving through the classical foundation like two conversations happening at once, Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened. This wasn't what she'd expected at all. Riley was barely aware of her surroundings now. Her eyes had closed somewhere around the second measure, and she'd fallen into that space she only found late at night in her bedroom. That place where nothing else existed except her and the music. Where her anxiety disappeared and her hands knew exactly what to do without her brain having to tell them. The piece evolved. What started as Mozart transformed into something entirely new. Modern chord progressions appeared, the kind you'd hear in a jazz club or a contemporary concert hall. But Riley didn't abandon the classical elements. Instead, She braided everything together, old and new, traditional and experimental, safe and daring. Her fingers flew across the keys faster now, creating cascading runs that seemed to tumble over each other like water rushing downstream. The dynamics shifted from whisper-soft to powerful and commanding, then back again. It was like listening to a story being told in a language everyone understood but nobody had quite heard before in the audience. The other students had stopped what they were doing. The girl who'd been practicing her song lyrics had fallen silent. The comedy duo had stopped rehearsing. Everyone was watching the girl at the piano, the one they'd barely noticed before, the one who was currently doing something none of them had thought possible. Jessica sat with her mouth open, her phone forgotten in her lap. She'd heard Riley play before, years ago at a school recital, but that had been simple pieces, the kind of thing every piano student plays. This was something else entirely. This was like watching someone speak in poetry when you'd only ever heard them whisper single words. Riley's arrangement moved into its middle section. Here, the music became more introspective, more emotional. Minor chords created a sense of longing, of questions without answers. Her right hand played a melody that sounded almost like crying, while her left hand provided a steady, heartbeat-like rhythm underneath. This was the part Riley had worked on the longest. The part where she'd tried to capture what it felt like to be invisible, to have things inside you that nobody else could see, to carry music in your head all day long but never have the courage to let it out. Mrs. Patterson found herself leaning forward, completely absorbed. In 20 years of teaching, she'd seen talented students, kids who could play difficult pieces flawlessly, students who went on to music school and professional careers. But there was something different about what she was witnessing now. This wasn't just technical skill. This was artistry. This was a young person pouring their entire soul into 88 keys. The piece built toward something bigger. Riley's hands moved with increasing intensity, the music growing louder and more urgent. The classical foundation was still there, but now it was joined by improvisation that felt both planned and spontaneous. She'd practiced this arrangement hundreds of times, but each time she played it, something new emerged. That was the beauty of blending genres there. There's always room for the moment to guide you. Sweat had formed on Riley's forehead. Her whole body moved with the music now, swaying slightly, her shoulders rising and falling with the dynamics. This was why she played. Not for grades or recitals or other people's approval, but for this feeling, this sensation of being completely alive, completely present, completely herself. The tempo increased again. Her fingers became a blur of motion, striking keys with perfect accuracy despite the speed. Complex jazz runs intertwined with classical arpeggios. Modern harmonies appeared and dissolved. The piano seemed to sing and shout and whisper all at once in the audience. One of the students had started recording on their phone, then another, and another. They didn't even think about it consciously. They just knew, somehow, that they were watching something they'd want to remember. Something they'd want to prove actually happened. Mrs. Patterson glanced around the auditorium and noticed the stage crew had appeared from the wings. Even Mr. Rodriguez, the custodian who'd been mopping the hallway, had poked his head in the door to see what was going on. Word was spreading, even in these few minutes. The quiet girl was playing piano, and you needed to hear this. Riley moved into the final section of her arrangement. This was the part she thought of as the awakening. The music shifted from introspective to triumphant. Major chords rang out with clarity and strength. The melody soared above everything else, confident and unashamed. Her left hand provided powerful bass notes that resonated through the entire auditorium, making the floor vibrate slightly. This was the part where the invisible girl became visible, where hiding transformed into revealing, where fear became courage. Her hands stretched across octaves, hitting notes at opposite ends of the keyboard with perfect timing. The music filled every corner of the auditorium, impossible to ignore, impossible to forget. It demanded attention. It demanded to be heard. And then, with one final decisive chord progression, Riley brought everything together. Classical met modern. Soft met loud. Question met answer. Her hand struck the final chord with absolute certainty, letting it ring out into the space, sustaining until the last vibration faded into silence. Riley's hands remained on the keys. Her eyes were still closed. Her chest rose and fell with deep breaths. She looked exhausted, like she'd just run a marathon. In a way, she had. She'd just traveled through 6 months of secret practice, years of hiding, and a lifetime of wondering if she was good enough. The silence in the auditorium lasted 3 full seconds. 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Riley opened her eyes slowly. The spell broke. She suddenly remembered where she was. In front of people? In front of everyone. Her face flushed red as reality came crashing back. What had she just done? She'd meant to play something safe, something that wouldn't draw attention. Instead, she'd played the arrangement, the one she'd never shown anyone, the one that revealed everything about who she really was. Her hands started to shake. She looked up at Mrs. Patterson, expecting to see confusion or disappointment, maybe even anger that she hadn't played what she'd said she would play. But Mrs. Patterson wasn't sitting anymore. She was standing, and her face was wet with tears. Then, like a wave breaking, the sound came. Applause, but not polite, scattered clapping. This was thunderous, explosive. Every single person in that auditorium was on their feet, clapping so hard their hands hurt. Some were cheering, some were wiping their eyes, some were just shaking their heads in disbelief. Jessica was jumping up and down, screaming Riley's name. The stage crew was whistling and applauding. Mr. Rodriguez was clapping with his mop still in his hand. And Mrs. Patterson was walking toward the stage, still crying, her clipboard forgotten on her chair. Riley stood up from the piano bench, her legs wobbling beneath her. She'd expected many things when she decided to audition. She'd expected to be nervous, maybe to mess up, possibly to embarrass herself. She had never expected this. Mrs. Patterson reached the stage and just stood there for a moment, looking up at Riley with an expression the girl couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe. Shock, definitely. And something else. Something like recognition. Like she was seeing Riley for the very first time. How long? Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice barely audible over the continuing applause. How long have you been able to play like that? Riley didn't know how to answer, because the truth was complicated. She'd been playing piano for 11 years. But she'd only been playing like this, really playing with everything she had, for about 6 months. And she'd only been brave enough to show someone for about 6 minutes. I've been working on it, Riley said quietly. I wasn't sure if it was any good. Mrs. Patterson let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Not sure if it was any good? Riley, that was... I don't even have words. That was extraordinary. Applause was finally starting to die down, but people were still talking excitedly. Still pointing at Riley, still looking at her like they'd never seen her before. Because in a way, they hadn't. The girl standing on that stage was a stranger to most of them. A stranger who'd been hiding in plain sight for years. Riley felt dizzy. Everything was happening too fast. This wasn't how auditions were supposed to go. You played your piece, the teacher said thank you, and you sat back down. You didn't get standing ovations. You didn't make people cry. But as Riley looked out at the faces in the audience, really looked at them for the first time, she saw something that made her chest feel tight. They weren't looking at her with pity or embarrassment. They were looking at her with respect, with admiration, with genuine happiness for what she'd just shared with them. And in that moment, Riley realized something important. She'd spent so long being afraid of being seen that she'd forgotten something crucial. Sometimes being invisible isn't protection. Sometimes it's just another kind of prison. The quiet girl from the back of music class had finally let people hear her voice. And it turned out she'd had something worth saying all along. Riley couldn't sleep that night. She kept replaying everything in her mind. The applause, Mrs. Patterson's tears, the way everyone had looked at her afterward, like she was someone completely different from the girl who'd walked into that auditorium. She stared at her ceiling, watching shadows from the streetlight outside dance across the white paint. Her phone sat on her nightstand, buzzing every few minutes with notifications. Text messages from people she'd never really talked to before. Comments on videos she didn't even know existed yet. Because that's what happens when 15 people record the same moment on their phones. It spreads. By Friday morning, the video was everywhere. Not just at Lincoln High, but beyond it. Someone had posted it on social media, and then someone else had shared it, and then it just kept going. Riley woke up to find she'd been tagged in dozens of posts. The titles varied, but they all said basically the same thing. Hidden talent revealed. Quiet student shocks everyone. You won't believe what this girl can do. Walking into school felt surreal. People were staring at her, but it was different from being invisible. Before, people looked through her like she wasn't there. Now they were actually seeing her, and Riley wasn't sure which feeling was more uncomfortable.
Ellie.
A girl from her English class rushed up to her at her locker. "Oh my God, I had no idea you could play like that. That video is incredible. My aunt shared it, and she lives in Seattle. Like, people outside of town are watching it." Riley felt her face get hot. "It's really not that big of a deal." "Are you kidding? It's amazing. I've watched it like 10 times already." All morning, it was the same thing. People approaching her in hallways. Students she'd never spoken to asking questions. Teachers mentioning it between lessons. Even Principal Hayes stopped her before third period to say how proud the school was to have such talent. By lunch, Ellie was exhausted from the attention. She found Jessica at their usual table in the corner of the cafeteria, grateful to see a familiar face. "This is insane," Riley said, dropping her backpack and sitting down heavily. "Everyone keeps talking to me." Jessica grinned. "Welcome to being visible. How does it feel?" "Overwhelming. Yesterday, I was nobody. Today, I can't walk 10 feet without someone stopping me." "No, you were never nobody," Jessica said firmly. "People just didn't know what they were missing. Now they do." Riley picked at her sandwich without really eating it. What if this is just temporary? What if everyone forgets about it by next week? Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But Riley, something changed yesterday. You changed. I saw it. The way you looked when you finished playing, you weren't the scared girl who almost did an audition. You were someone who'd just done something brave. Before Riley could respond, Mrs. Patterson appeared at their table. She had that look on her face, the one teachers get when they're about to ask you for something. "Riley, do you have a minute? I wanted to talk to you about something important." Riley followed Mrs. Patterson into an empty classroom. The teacher closed the door and turned around with an expression that was both excited and serious. "I got a call this morning," Mrs. Patterson began, "from the regional music director. She saw your video. Apparently her daughter goes to Lincoln and showed it to her last night. She was very impressed." Riley's heart started beating faster. "Okay, ... She wants to know if you'd be interested in auditioning for the youth symphony. They have an opening for a pianist, and she thinks you'd be perfect. It's a pretty big deal, Riley. They perform at real concert halls. They've had students go on to prestigious music schools." The room felt too small suddenly. Riley sat down in one of the student desks. "I don't know. That sounds really intense." "It is intense. It's a serious commitment. Rehearsals twice a week, performances once a month. But Riley, this is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come around often. You have something special. Really special. And I think you should at least consider it." Riley thought about her bedroom. Her keyboard. The safety of playing for no one but herself. Then she thought about yesterday. About how terrifying it had been to share her music. But also how alive she'd felt. How right it had seemed, despite the fear. "Can I think about it?" Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Of course. Take the weekend. But Riley, don't let fear make this decision for you. I've taught a lot of students. Some of them were technically perfect but didn't have any soul in their playing. Others had passion but lacked discipline. You have both. That's rare. Don't waste it by hiding." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Riley went through the motions of attending classes, but her mind was somewhere else. She kept thinking about what Mrs. Patterson had said. About the youth symphony. About not wasting her talent. After school, she didn't go straight home. Instead, she found herself walking to the auditorium. The building was empty now, quiet in a way that felt peaceful rather than lonely. She walked down the aisle and stood in front of the stage. Looking up at the piano that still sat there from yesterday's auditions, she climbed the steps and sat down at the bench. Her fingers found the keys naturally, like greeting an old friend. She started playing softly, nothing in particular, just letting her hands wander. The music that came out was different from yesterday's arrangement. This was improvisation, pure and simple. Her fingers found melodies she'd never practiced, harmonies that appeared in the moment. This was what she loved most about music. It wasn't just about playing notes on a page. It was about expressing things you couldn't put into words. Feelings that were too big or too complicated or too deep for regular conversation. At the piano, Riley could say everything she was too shy to speak out loud. She played through her confusion about the attention, through her fear of the youth symphony audition, through the strange sensation of suddenly being visible after years of hiding. The music shifted and changed with each emotion, sometimes gentle, sometimes aggressive, always honest. "I thought I might find you here." Riley's hand stopped mid-phrase. She turned to see her mom standing at the back of the auditorium. She must have come looking for her when Riley didn't come home on time. Her mom walked down the aisle and sat in one of the front row seats. "Mrs. Patterson called me. She told me about the youth symphony opportunity." "Mom, I don't know if I can do it. It's one thing to play at a school talent show, but a real symphony? With professional conductors and serious musicians? What if I'm not good enough?" Her mom was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you remember when you were 7 and you begged me for piano lessons? I wasn't sure we could afford them, but you were so determined. You said you heard music in your head all the time, and you needed to learn how to get it out." The middle section came, the part that had given her the most trouble during practice. The tempo increased, and the notes came faster, her right hand and left hand having to work in perfect coordination. One small mistake here, and the whole thing could fall apart. Her fingers flew across the keys. Muscle memory took over, guided by thousands of practice repetitions. The notes tumbled out in a cascade of sound, each one landing exactly where it needed to be. She made it through. No mistakes. The piece built toward its conclusion, the dramatic chords returning with even more power than before. Riley put everything she had into those final measures. Her hands struck the keys with force, the sound filling the entire room. It's impossible to ignore. The final chord rang out, deep and resonant. Riley held it, letting it sustain until it faded naturally into silence. She lifted her hands from the keys. Her heart was pounding. Sweat had formed on her forehead. She'd just played the most difficult piece of her life. In front of people who could change everything, Riley turned to look at the panel. Trying to read their faces, Director Morrison was writing something on her notepad. The assistant conductor was leaning back in his chair with an unreadable expression. The older gentleman was nodding slowly, a small smile on his face. The silence stretched out for what felt like forever. Finally, Director Morrison looked up. "You have very strong technical skills. Your finger work is clean, your timing is excellent, and you clearly understand the structure of the piece." Riley waited for the but. There was always a but. However, Director Morrison continued, and there it was. "Technical skill is only part of what we look for in youth symphony members. We need musicians who can bring something more to their playing, something that makes people feel, not just admire." Riley's heart sank. She'd failed. After everything, the school audition, the viral video, 2 weeks of intense practice, she'd failed. But Director Morrison wasn't finished. "That being said, you have that quality. What you did in that school auditorium wasn't just technically impressive. It was moving. It made people feel something. And you brought that same quality to today's performance. That's not something we can teach. Either you have it, or you don't." Riley's heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. She didn't dare to hope, didn't dare to assume what this meant. The older gentleman spoke for the first time. His voice was gentle but firm. "I've been on this panel for 12 years. I've heard hundreds of auditions. Most of them are forgettable. Technically competent, but emotionally empty. What you just played was not forgettable." Director Morrison nodded. "We have 2 questions for you, Riley. First, Are you willing to commit to rehearsals twice a week and monthly performances? This isn't casual. It's demanding, and it will require you to manage your time carefully with school and other obligations. Riley found her voice. Yes, I can commit to that. Second question. That arrangement you played at your school audition? The one that blended classical with jazz and modern elements? Did you create that yourself? Yes, ma'am. I've been working on it for about 6 months. Director Morrison exchanged glances with the other 2 panel members. Something passed between them, some silent communication Riley couldn't interpret. We'd like to offer you a position in the Youth Symphony, Director Morrison said. We'll start you in the second piano section, which is standard for new members. You'll work your way up based on your growth and commitment. Riley felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her. She'd gotten in. She'd actually gotten in. Thank you, she managed to say. Thank you so much. There's one more thing, Director Morrison added. We have a spring showcase coming up in 3 months. It's our biggest performance of the year, held in the main concert hall. We typically feature 1 or 2 soloists from the symphony. I'd like you to consider performing your original arrangement for that showcase. We're always looking for fresh perspectives, and what you've created is exactly the kind of innovative music we want to highlight. Riley couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. They wanted her to perform her arrangement? The one she'd created in her bedroom? On a real stage in front of a real audience? You don't have to decide now, Director Morrison said, misreading Riley's silence as hesitation. Think about it. Talk it over with your family and your music teacher. But I think it would be something special. Riley walked out of that audition room in a daze. Her mom stood up immediately when she saw Riley's face, trying to read whether it was good news or bad. I got in, Riley said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mom, I got in. Her mom pulled her into a tight hug right there in the lobby, not caring that other people were watching. Riley hugged her back, finally letting herself believe it was real. On the drive home, Riley stared out the window, watching the city pass by. Everything looked the same as it had this morning, but somehow different too. Like the world had shifted slightly, opening up possibilities that hadn't existed before. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Jessica. How'd it go? Riley typed back. I got in. And they want me to perform my arrangement at their spring showcase. The response came back immediately. Riley. Oh my God, I knew you could do it. More texts started flooding in. Jessica must have told people. Because suddenly Riley's phone was blowing up with congratulations from classmates, from friends, even from teachers who'd heard about the audition. But the message that made Riley's eyes water came from Mrs. Patterson. I'm so proud of you. You took a chance on yourself, and look what happened. This is just the beginning. Riley looked down at her hands. These hands that had spent so many years playing in private, hiding their talent behind closed doors. These hands that had shaken with fear during that school audition just a few weeks ago. These hands that had just played Rachmaninoff for a panel of serious musicians and earned a spot in the Youth Symphony. They were the same hands they'd always been. But somehow, they felt different now. Stronger, braver, ready for whatever came next. The quiet girl from the back of music class was gone. In her place was someone new. Someone who'd learned that the scariest thing isn't being seen. It's never letting anyone see you at all. And Riley was done hiding. The next 3 months passed faster than Riley thought possible. Between school, homework, and youth symphony rehearsals twice a week, her schedule was packed in a way it had never been before. But she wasn't complaining. For the first time in her life, Riley felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The youth symphony was different from anything she'd experienced. The other musicians were serious about their craft, dedicated in ways that pushed Riley to be better. The conductor, a stern but fair man named Mr. Kawasaki, demanded excellence, but also knew how to bring out the best in his players. Riley started in the second piano section, just as Director Morrison had said, but she didn't mind. She was learning so much just by being there. At school, things had changed too. People knew who Riley was now, not just as the girl from the viral video, but as an actual person. She'd made new friends, people who shared her love of music and art. She still sat with Jessica at lunch most days, but now their table had expanded. Other students joined them, and the conversations were richer, fuller. But the biggest change was in Riley herself. She walked differently now, spoke up more in class, made eye contact when people talked to her. The shell she'd built around herself for so many years had cracked open, and what emerged was someone she was still getting to know, someone braver than she'd ever imagined she could be. The spring showcase was approaching quickly. Riley had agreed to perform her original arrangement, and now that decision felt both thrilling and terrifying. This wasn't a school auditorium with a couple hundred people. This was the city's main concert hall. Over 1,000 seats, a professional sound system, stage lights that could make or break a performance. 2 weeks before the showcase, Riley had her first panic attack about it. She was in her bedroom, practicing the arrangement for what felt like the 100th time, when suddenly her hands froze on the keys. What was she thinking? Who was she to perform an original piece on a stage where famous musicians had played? What if people hated it? What if the arrangement that had worked in a high school auditorium fell flat in a real concert hall? Her mom found her sitting on her bed, her head in her hands, breathing too fast. "I can't do it," Riley said. "I need to tell Director Morrison I changed my mind. I'll just play something classical instead. Something safe." Her mom sat down next to her. "You could do that, and you'd be fine. You'd give a perfectly good performance and everyone would clap politely and then forget about it." "That sounds better than embarrassing myself in front of 1,000 people. Does it, though?" "Riley, remember why you created that arrangement in the first place. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were trying to express something that mattered to you. That hasn't changed." The next 3 months passed faster than Riley thought possible, between school, homework, and youth symphony rehearsals twice a week. Her schedule was packed in a way it had never been before, but she wasn't complaining. For the first time in her life, Riley felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The youth symphony was different from anything she'd experienced. The other musicians were serious about their craft, dedicated in ways that pushed Riley to be better. The conductor, a stern but fair man named Mr. Kawasaki, demanded excellence, but also knew how to bring out the best in his players. Riley started in the second piano section, just as Director Morrison had said, but she didn't mind. She was learning so much just by being there. At school, things had changed too. People knew who Riley was now, not just as the girl from the viral video, but as an actual person. She'd made new friends. People who shared her love of music and art. She still sat with Jessica at lunch most days, but now their table had expanded. Other students joined them, and the conversations were richer, fuller. But the biggest change was in Riley herself. She walked differently now, spoke up more in class, made eye contact when people talked to her. The shell she'd built around herself for so many years had cracked open, and what emerged was someone she was still getting to know, someone braver than she'd ever imagined she could be. The spring showcase was approaching quickly. Riley had agreed to perform her original arrangement, and now that decision felt both thrilling and terrifying. This wasn't a school auditorium with a couple hundred people. This was the city's main concert hall. Over 1,000 seats, a professional sound system, stage lights that could make or break a performance. 2 weeks before the showcase, Riley had her first panic attack about it. She was in her bedroom practicing the arrangement for what felt like the 100th time, when suddenly her hands froze on the keys. What was she thinking? Who was she to perform an original piece on a stage where famous musicians had played? What if people hated it? What if the arrangement that had worked in a high school auditorium fell flat in a real concert hall? Her mom found her sitting on her bed, her head in her hands, breathing too fast. "I can't do it," Riley said. "I need to tell Director Morrison I changed my mind. I'll just play something classical instead. Something safe." Her mom sat down next to her. "You could do that, and you'd be fine. You'd give a perfectly good performance, and everyone would clap politely and then forget about it. That sounds better than embarrassing myself in front of 1,000 people. Does it, though?" "Riley, remember why you created that arrangement in the first place. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were trying to express something that mattered to you. That hasn't changed. Riley looked up at her mom. But what if it's not good enough for a real concert hall? What if it is? What if it's exactly what that concert hall needs? You won't know unless you try. And if you back out now, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what could have happened if you'd been brave enough to see it through. Those words stayed with Riley for the next 2 weeks. On days when doubt crept in, when she wanted to run away from the scary things she'd committed to, she remembered them. She'd come too far to let fear win now. The night of the spring showcase arrived. Riley stood backstage in a new black dress her mom had bought for the occasion. She could hear the audience filing in, the murmur of hundreds of conversations blending together into a low hum. Her hands were cold, despite the warm temperature backstage. Jessica had come with Riley's mom and dad. Mrs. Patterson was there too. Sitting in the third row with other teachers from Lincoln High, even some of Riley's new friends from the Youth Symphony were in the audience, there to support each other. The first half of the showcase featured the full orchestra playing several classical pieces. Riley performed with them, her part relatively simple but satisfying. Being part of something bigger, all those instruments working together to create something beautiful, was a feeling she'd never experienced before. It was different from playing solo. Not better or worse, just different. Both had their place. Intermission came and went. The second half of the showcase featured the soloists. A violinist performed first, followed by a cellist. Both were incredible, their skills honed by years of dedication. Riley watched from backstage, her nervousness building with each passing minute. Then it was her turn. Director Morrison walked onto the stage to introduce her. Our final soloist tonight is Riley Chen, the newest member of our youth symphony. Riley is only 17, but she's already shown remarkable talent and creativity. Tonight, she'll be performing an original arrangement that blends classical, jazz, and contemporary elements. Please welcome Riley Chen. Applause filled the concert hall. Riley walked onto the stage, the lights bright and warm on her face. The piano waited for her, elegant and patient. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and looked out at the audience. She couldn't see individual faces past the first few rows. The stage lights made everything beyond that a blur of shadows. But she knew they were there. Over 1,000 people, all waiting to hear what she had to say. For a moment, Riley felt that old familiar fear trying to take hold. The voice that whispered she wasn't good enough, that she should have stayed invisible, that this was all a mistake. But then she thought about everything that had led to this moment. The school audition where she'd first found her courage. The youth symphony audition where she'd proven to herself what she could do. All the hours of practice, all the support from people who believed in her, all the time she'd chosen to be brave. Instead of safe, she placed her fingers on the keys, and she began to play. The arrangement started the way it always did, that familiar classical opening. But this time, playing it on a concert hall piano with professional acoustics. It sounded even more beautiful than Riley had imagined. The notes rang out clear and pure, filling every corner of the massive space. As the piece evolved, Riley felt herself relax into it. This was her music, her story. She knew every note, every transition, every moment where one genre melted into another. Her hands moved with confidence, her body swayed with the rhythm, and her heart poured everything into those keys. She heard herself breathing, heard the sound of her fingers striking the keys, heard the way the piano resonated in the vast space. Everything else fell away. The audience, the pressure, the fear, all of it dissolved until there was only the music. The arrangement built and shifted, taking the audience on the same journey Riley had traveled, from hiding to revealing, from doubt to confidence, from silence to song. The classical foundation remained, but it was enriched by the jazz improvisation, elevated by the modern harmonies, made complete by the blend of everything she'd learned and felt and experienced in the audience. Riley's mom was crying. Mrs. Patterson was gripping the armrest of her seat, completely absorbed. Jessica was recording on her phone, tears running down her face. And Director Morrison, standing at the back of the hall, was smiling with satisfaction. She'd known this would be special. The music reached its climax, those powerful chords that represented triumph over fear. Riley played them with everything she had, her fingers strong and sure, her heart completely open. This was why music mattered. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. It expressed things that words couldn't touch, feelings that lived too deep for ordinary conversation. The final notes rang out into the silence of the concert hall. Riley held the last chord, letting it sustain until it faded naturally. Reluctant to let the moment end, when her hands finally lifted from the keys, there was a beat of absolute silence. Then the audience erupted. People were on their feet instantly, applauding with an intensity that made the earlier applause seem quiet. The sound washed over Riley like a wave, overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. She stood up from the piano bench, her legs shaky, and took a bow. The applause continued. People were shouting bravo. Some were wiping their eyes. The standing ovation went on for so long that Riley had to bow 3 times before it finally began to fade as she walked off stage. Director Morrison was there waiting. That was extraordinary, Riley. Truly extraordinary. We're going to be talking about that performance for years. The rest of the night passed in a blur. People came up to Riley during the reception after the showcase, telling her how much the performance had moved them. Some were musicians who appreciated the technical skill. Others were just regular people who'd felt something in the music they couldn't quite explain. One woman, probably in her 60s, took Riley's hands and said, "I gave up piano when I was your age because I didn't think I was good enough. Watching you tonight made me remember why I loved it. I think I'm going to start playing again." Those words meant more to Riley than any professional compliment could have. Because that's what this had all been about, really. Not about being the best or the most talented, but about having the courage to share what was inside you, and in doing so, giving other people permission to do the same. 6 months ago, Riley had been the invisible girl in the back of music class. Now she was standing in a concert hall, surrounded by people who'd just witnessed her pour her heart out through music. The journey from there to here hadn't been easy. It had required facing fears she'd carried for years. It